I'm Andrea, and this is Analytics Unplugged, where we talk about all things data. And today we're going to be talking about AI with Buxton's own AI expert, Gene Schoepp. Gene, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this point in your career that makes you an expert?
I'm happy to. Spent a lot of time and worked through a number of positions in the IT space, starting over 40 years ago, and carried those skills through, worked in a variety of both operational as well as leadership positions in the technology world. And about 5 years ago or so, I retired and stepped away from all of that. And roughly a year ago, I heard the siren call of artificial intelligence. And honestly, my first addiction to it came through ChatGPT and the ability to see all of the bringing to fruition all of the things we've done the last 40 years. It was always my aspiration. I remember before I got my first computer that I told my younger brother, this isn't just, you can't just tell it to draw rocks and get the asteroids game, right? You can now. It took us 40 years to get here, but the fact of the matter is you can. And so I became absolutely infatuated with the idea of artificial intelligence and set about educating myself because I wanted to be able to run it. And what really excited me, excuse me, was that you can run these models yourself. You can run them in your home. They're not attached to massive data centers out on the internet. And that, to me, drove the utility to a level and a potential distribution across the community, across humanity, that was beyond anything I'd seen. And I just couldn't sit on the sidelines for that, and I have found since that my understanding of systems and processes and practices and organizations are infinitely useful because these models lack human experience. And we have human experience to guide how we use them, to guide how we implement them into existing processes, how we use them to attack new things. And I just couldn't sit it out. So here I am, and I'm thrilled to be here.
And we're so lucky to have you. I really want to dive in more so to the ethical aspects of AI. I think that's become a huge concern many have. Um, is ethical AI possible? Just to preface.
I sure hope so.
Yeah.
And I have high hopes for that because, as it stands today, we still have agency over the AI. We're still in control. So it's up to us to make sure that ethical AI is not only possible, but is how it turns out. We have the ability through any number of ways, both technical and societal, to assure that AI is used ethically and that it's created ethically. There's a number of things that go into it that start when the models are even ideated, and how you maintain and make sure that you avoid things like bias. You install behaviors that are desired and you discourage behaviors that aren't, that will make them simulate the human experience and simulate the ethics that we carry around with us, and the things that we would do are the things that it emphasizes, and things that we would never do are the things that you de-emphasize. So I think it's going to be critical to, obviously, the success of AI. It wouldn't take too many ethical breaches for it to become, even further more concern than there is. And not all of that concern would be well-founded. So I'm very hopeful that we'll continue to push in ethical ways. The fact that we're having this conversation today, I think it's a green shoot, right? We're not ignoring this issue. We're not turning a blind eye to it. It's something that comes up in almost every discussion I have. And I like the fact that a lot of time I'm the one bringing it up and saying, look, have you considered that what you're doing is really displacing this, or it may not be, fair to everyone in the picture. So how are we going to deal with that? How are we going to mitigate it? And then how are we going to act going forward?
I love that. You mentioned bias. And one thing that I just keep coming back to is there a way to avoid bias when humans are the ones that build AI? And if humans are inherently biased, would that always creep in? It almost seems like it's doomed to create an unbiased AI.
It's difficult, but like a lot of things that are difficult, it's well worth doing. Yeah, a bias starts really when you start and initiate and you ideate the model, and you decide what it's going to be good at and what it's not going to be good at. And then you pre-train it with language and grammar and structure and language structure. And then you feed it a data set. And that data set has a huge impact on what it becomes because it both forms the basis of its knowledge, what it's going to know, but it also forms the basis of how it reasons. And it learns that from our language. So to your point, having all of that human language be what directs the model puts us in a place of control. So in that training stage, we can decide what it gets trained on and what it's not. And you might think, okay, so taking things out is always a good thing because we don't want all that bad stuff in there. The problem is sometimes when you take something out, you lose something else. You lose a connection between two things that actually may have been another ethical barrier. So if we continue on, we've trained a model, and now we do two more steps. One is fine tuning, which is generally about the task that it's going to perform. And you don't tend to find a lot of bias there, and you have some ability to suppress bad behaviors there and encourage good behaviors. And then the last step is when you align the model. And that's really the strong space in which you give it specific direction as to how it should behave, about how it should do things and not do things. All that said, you can do all those things right and still end up with a model that will give you bias because it was unintentional. Just like humans have unconscious and unintentional bias, the model can as well. And it's worse for a model because it has no consciousness. It doesn't understand.
Hmm.
It's providing an answer based on math. And so I think the bias, again, I take great solace in the fact that we're having the conversation about it, and it is a popular conversation in the general gestalt around AI. And I think the great thing is a lot of that AI creates these challenges for us. And in a lot of cases, it can be what helps us get through them. There's techniques, some of them are highly technical, some of them are less technical, where you use an adversarial model. You take one model that was trained with a certain set of modeling and data, and you pit it against another model that was trained with a different neural network and a different data set. And you can compare those outputs, and that gives you a really strong indicator because in my own testing, it doesn't take more than a couple of single digit models to really understand if one or more of them is biased because it displays different answers, it displays different behaviors. It's kind of like we've been given the tools to mess up, and then we've been given the tools to clean up our mess, which I think, again, is heartening.
Yeah, so it seems like there are two paths when it comes to addressing bias. The build it better, which I feel like you've talked
Sure.
about all of those steps. Then the next would be police it better, which I feel like that leads into what we talked about before, which was transparency, right to an explanation. So could you go more into that path, into more of the policing aspect of AI?
Sure. I think it's a situation where the transparency is important. And if I can go kind of on a sidelight for a second, the the things that we have that we set as gold standards are interesting. So, for example, a human physician is our gold standard for healthcare. And that physician is licensed to do that. And the physician, when they provide a prescription or a protocol, they can then turn around and explain to us why. It's because of this. It's because of that. My experience says this. My training says that. Generally, when an AI gives us an answer, it just knows that's the answer. It doesn't know why it's right. It doesn't know if it's right. That's why hallucinations happen. And the all of that mechanism puts us in a situation where even if the answer's right, it's uncomfortable not knowing why. And that transparency is really key, particularly because the model never answers the same way twice. This isn't algorithmic. Here you do have a situation where 2 plus 2 is going to equal 4-ish. It's never going to be exactly 4, minor set of the circumstances. So the transparency comes in again. I think here, the models themselves, we're learning both how to train them in ways and fine tune them from the previous vocabulary to tell them, explain as you go. Take me step by step. And the models, in some of the cases, that's enough because now we can see it. They've exposed the logic. And maybe if we're just adding 2 plus 2 and getting to 4, that's satisfactory. But when it's more complicated, we're going to need better tools. Sam Altman in a recent interview said, it's great because we have these models and we can really x-ray their behavior and understand them. And he's either optimistic or there's something in the labs we haven't been told about yet, because in my experience, we're not there yet. But again, attention is being paid. And this is another area where I think we'll see artificial intelligence leap to a place where it will help us through these things. Again, under human agency and under human control. We'll create that transparency and perhaps even certification standards or safety standards and testing protocols. Those are great. Something will slip through. I sleep well at night because AI is not up against perfection. It's up in many cases against human performance standard. And sometimes that's a pretty low bar, depending on what the topic is. Not that I'm not a fan of the human race, but I think that can be a low bar. And we have to appreciate that asking for perfection in some of these things is, it may be possible, but as long as it's above the human standard, we need to consider that too. But for transparency, we need to get to the human standard. We need to get back to those gold standards of understanding why, step by step, we got to a conclusion and how that impacts, the outcome that we're looking for.
So I learned this one term the other day called fair washing. So the idea of transparency in the model, maybe veering away from black box models, so they're more understandable, interpretable. But could they not? So if someone demands the right for an explanation, like let's say there's AI recruitment software and their resume got rejected and they want to know why, could the organization simply lie?
We're now in the realm of human behavior.
Yes.
And I'd have to say that's absolutely possible, right? And I'm not, that's really up to the human ethics of the situation and sometimes to the emotional ethics of the situation. Sometimes we're owed an explanation about something. In other times, maybe we're not. And I guess we need to be careful to not demand an explanation from AI when we might not demand the same explanation from a human. Again, that sets a performance standard that is above the human standard, and maybe we should ask for that. But we're also, I think, they're leaning into something that says it has to be absolutely right every time. And there's very few things of that other than 2 + 2 = 4 from an
Yeah.
algorithmic perspective.
Okay. Another aspect of concern is, which is maybe one that I feel like is not talked about as much, which is environmental concerns when it comes to AI.
Yeah, it's a hot topic for me. I live on a wooded property, and we constantly think about our trees, and even as we watch climate change happen, our trees have suffered over the last several summers, and we're watching that in real time out our windows. There's a lot of anecdotal information. One of the studies I saw said that every time you generate an image with ChatGPT, you're consuming about as much electricity as it takes to charge your cell phone. And honestly, this has channeled my behavior. I think more about why I'm going to have this image generated. Is it purely for my entertainment? Am I going to use this for something? Am I going to forward an outcome out of this? Because I have that, built into me. And I think part of it is we have to make people aware of the impact. On a macro level, it's difficult to imagine that we can achieve the levels of kind of displacement of work from the human workforce to an AI workforce and have enough electricity to do this on a large scale, much like it would be difficult today for the electrical grid to support 100% electrical cars. So we do have to think about that. And the great thing is those costs are coming down fast. The initial models that ChatGPT was based on 2 years back are now 40 times more efficient from an electrical perspective. The ones from just a year ago are now 10 times as efficient as they were. So again, I'm heartened that the human race is thinking about these things. We understand they need to be efficient. We understand that they need to be sustainable because we're going to live with them for some time, and they're going to live with us for some time as long as it is sustainable. But this is something we can't forget about. We don't have the ability to get where we think we're going to go with the grid and the systems we have. So we will either have to make them more sustainable or we'll have to come up with another solution. Or we'll just ask ChatGPT for one.
So, Buxton, we're a data company, so obviously we care a lot about data, and I know data privacy and protection is another ethical concern that many have regarding AI. How should organizations, systems that use AI, how should they address these concerns?
I think the good thing is here we've got a robust structure in the human species, regardless of whether it's the United States or Europe or that, for dealing with privacy. And you can look at the AI systems as just one more expression of how of where these things can happen. Specific to within our firm, we're very cognizant of any kind of customer data or our own trade secrets in that being passed to an outside cloud-based AI. Not that there's any malintent or, we think that ChatGPT is going to steal our trade secrets, but at the end of the day, it's a duty of care. It's a duty of care that we have to that data. There's a lot of existing privacy structure. Certainly, it'll need updating. There's no two ways about that. We will need to keep it current with the current technology and capability, but the current, it's not that much different than what we've dealt with already. Certainly a concern. There are no two ways about it. The proliferation of AI brings with it the possibility that people will use the tools in ways that perhaps outside of Buxton, someone wouldn't understand what happens when they send a conversation, when they ask about and they use someone's personal information. Um, they don't understand where it could go. And we go back to transparency, right? Have we been fully understood? Some of these firms, actually all of these big models, are using our conversations to make those models better, to continue to train them forward. And if you do include personal information or trade secrets or whatever, part of that goes towards that training. So I think we need to surface those, just like we have, with all of the, you get attacked about cookies every time you go to a new website, right? It's another thing. It's about how am I going to handle your data? I think in some cases those AIs we'll see it develop to where it's more visible to us, to where it will be an attack when we first go to the AI of, I could use your data for this or this and this, and is that okay? And is it okay to train on it? Is it okay to train on it abstracted? If I took your conversation and handed it to an LLM and said, get rid of the personal information and expand it this way, can I train on that? We have capabilities that we haven't yet had the opportunity to think about and decide. Do they need regulation? Do they need legislation? And we'll come to understand those, and we'll deal with them, I think, the same way we always have. And I look, and I'll admit on camera, I haven't read the proposal from the European Union on privacy and on AI, but I think they are one. When I did my own training, I drew heavily on the AI ethics information that came out of the European Union, because they tend to take a much more individual-centric approach, a much more a privacy-first approach. So I think if their structure and their design is one that appears to be something that is useful, you don't have to be a country to adopt that. You can adopt that as a company. You can adopt that as an individual too. So I think that is, it's certainly a topic worth paying attention to, and it's one that we can't not pay attention to, because it is subject to the same regulation that we already have in place, which again is a relatively high bar in most places. So we'll stick to that bar, and then we'll make sure that we don't accidentally find a way either over or around the bar that wasn't obvious to us before.